The corridors of the Royal Courts of Justice in London have witnessed centuries of legal drama, political upheaval, and constitutional battles that have shaped the very fabric of British history. But on a cold, rain-soaked morning in January 2026, those ancient halls found themselves at the center of something entirely unprecedented, a confrontation not between nations or political rivals, but between a reigning monarch and his own son. What unfolded over the course of several days was not merely a legal dispute. It was a reckoning that had been building for years, fueled by wounded pride, fractured loyalty, and a relentless battle over something far more symbolic than money or media coverage. It was a battle over the crown itself, who owns its legacy, who can invoke its authority, and who, ultimately, gets to wear its identity. Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, had long positioned their departure from royal life as an act of self-preservation. They framed it as a courageous step away from an institution they claimed had failed them, failed to protect them from a hostile press, failed to embrace Meghan's identity, and failed to offer the support a modern royal family should provide. For years, they built their narrative carefully from the sunlit hills of Montecito, California, releasing documentaries, giving headline-grabbing interviews, and constructing a brand empire that traded heavily on their royal associations. But in January 2026, that carefully constructed narrative collided with a wall of institutional resistance that no amount of public relations strategy could soften. The centerpiece of this collision was Harry's ongoing legal campaign against two of Britain's most powerful tabloid institutions, the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday. His legal team had spent months assembling what they described as a comprehensive case of unlawful information gathering, alleging phone hacking, bribery of police officers for confidential records, and the systematic theft of private medical and financial data. These were serious allegations, and they were not made lightly. Joined by a coalition of prominent co-claimants including Sir Elton John, Baroness Doreen Lawrence, actress Elizabeth Hurley, and several other public figures who claimed similar violations, Harry's case appeared formidable on paper. The High Court of Justice was set to hear the opening arguments, and the world watched with anticipation. But it was not the legal arguments themselves that ignited the firestorm which followed. It was Meghan. Before boarding a private jet at Los Angeles International Airport bound for London, Meghan made a statement to waiting cameras that would reverberate across continents within hours. Standing at the press gate with practiced composure, she declared that the Duchess of Sussex was returning to Britain with her crown intact. The phrase was not part of any prepared press release. It was, by multiple accounts, an off-the-cuff declaration, a moment of personal theater that Meghan perhaps believed would signal strength and confidence. Instead, it ignited one of the most intense controversies of her public life. The British public reacted with a mixture of bewilderment and fury. Royal commentators struggled to process the audacity of the language. Legal analysts pointed out that Meghan had formally relinquished the Her Royal Highness styling in 2020 as part of the negotiated terms of the Sussex exit from working royal life. That was not a technicality. It was an agreement, a documented and deliberate choice made by both Harry and Meghan in exchange for the freedoms of private life. To now invoke the imagery of a crown, to speak as though she were returning in a position of royal authority, struck many observers as not merely presumptuous but constitutionally provocative. Buckingham Palace responded with unusual swiftness and clarity. An official statement was issued declaring that no member of the royal household, active or retired, had extended or would extend representative status or ceremonial privilege to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex in connection with their civil litigation matters. The language was precise and deliberate. Any such claim, the palace stated, was without the consent or recognition of the crown. It was the kind of language the palace reserves for moments of genuine institutional seriousness, and it left absolutely no room for ambiguity. What made the situation even more combustible was the revelation of what Meghan's legal team had quietly submitted to security and hospitality officials in the days before the court appearance. A confidential list of requirements, which subsequently found its way to senior press editors in what many interpreted as a deliberate leak from palace sources, outlined the conditions under which Meghan would agree to return to British soil. The list was extraordinary in its scope and its presumption. It demanded that 4 entire floors of a luxury London hotel be secured exclusively for her use, that all service staff address her as Her Royal Highness despite the formal removal of that title, that bulletproof glass be installed at all venues she might attend, that an armed convoy of vehicles be available around the clock, and that a personal retinue including a chef, stylist, driver, personal assistant, and separate public relations staff be funded and accommodated. The Home Office response was brief and unsparing. The United Kingdom provides security for serving members of the royal household only, and the Duchess of Sussex did not qualify. The palace's decision to allow the list to reach the press was itself a statement of intent. For years, the royal family had absorbed criticism and provocation from the Sussex corner with studied silence. The leaking of Meghan's demands was the institutional equivalent of throwing down a gauntlet. It signaled that the period of dignified restraint was over, and that the palace was now prepared to engage on terms of its own choosing. King Charles, according to multiple sources with knowledge of the internal discussions, was not merely displeased, he was furious. The accumulation of provocations had reached a threshold that even his characteristic patience could not absorb. What pushed him over the edge, insiders say, was not the hotel demands or even the Crown comment, though both infuriated him. It was a sealed legal filing submitted by Harry's team to the High Court containing a detailed timeline of alleged media manipulation and internal sabotage, a document that referenced not only Prince William's household but a senior royal advisor understood to have direct access to the king himself. The implication was clear and shattering. Harry was not merely accusing tabloid editors of misconduct. He was placing the responsibility for years of damaging press coverage at the feet of the monarch's own inner circle. That accusation crossed a line that previous provocations had only approached. Charles authorized his legal counsel to begin preparing what is known under British law as a pre-action protocol, the formal prerequisite for defamation litigation. The scope of the proposed counteraction was broad, encompassing statements made by Harry and Meghan to American media outlets over a period of several years, allegations made in their Netflix documentary series, and claims that indirectly implicated Princess Catherine and the Wales household. The palace's legal argument, as it was being constructed, would contend that the Sussexes had knowingly spread false narratives causing reputational harm to working members of the royal family, and that their persistent invocation of royal identity in public statements and commercial branding constituted unauthorized appropriation of institutional authority. For Princess Catherine, the entire episode unfolded at a careful distance. Her aides confirmed that she had no intention of engaging with the drama surrounding the Sussex return. On the day that Meghan's media storm dominated the London news cycle, Catherine was in the north of England, visiting a children's cancer care centre. She wore no designer ensemble, carried no ceremonial aura, and permitted no press photographers to accompany her through the wards. She spent hours speaking quietly with nurses, sitting with grieving families, and walking the corridors with the kind of unperformed compassion that requires no audience to validate it. When a reporter later asked whether she had any response to the Duchess of Sussex returning with her crown, Catherine offered only a polite smile and continued walking. Royal observers noted that the contrast between the two women had never been more starkly drawn, nor more eloquently expressed through action rather than words. Inside the courtroom itself, the atmosphere was tense from the opening moments. Justice Niccolin, presiding over the proceedings, had already developed a reputation for impatience with what he regarded as the theatrical dimensions of high-profile litigation. Harry's lead counsel faced a difficult morning. Key evidence had been submitted behind schedule. A witness who had been central to the case had retracted his statement, claiming it had been prepared without his proper consent. The judge interrupted the proceedings more than once, demanding clarification on the evidentiary basis for the most serious accusations involving Prince William's office, and pressing for an explanation of why several key witnesses had either withdrawn or declined to appear in person. Throughout the proceedings, neither William nor Catherine appeared in court, yet their presence hung over every exchange. The palace had submitted a formal declaration to the court confirming that the king, queen consort, and the Prince and Princess of Wales did not authorize or support the plaintiff's claim to represent the interests or reputation of the royal household in any legal matter. A second letter, signed by Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and the Duchess of Edinburgh, stated plainly that the claimants' efforts to associate private grievances with the dignity of the crown were wholly rejected. The institution had spoken collectively and without equivocation. Justice Nicholan's closing remarks on the first day of proceedings carried no verdict, but they carried weight. He reminded the court that its function was to examine truth and not to serve as a platform for theatrical self-presentation. The pursuit of privacy, he observed, could not itself become an act of spectacle. It was a rebuke directed at no one by name, but it was understood by everyone in the room. When the session concluded, Meghan departed quickly and without comment. There was no victory statement, no triumphant wave to waiting cameras. Harry lingered in the corridor, and one photograph that circulated widely in the hours that followed showed him staring at the floor with an expression of profound solitude, a man who had returned to the country of his birth to fight for something he believed in, only to find the doors of institutional recognition firmly closed against him. The broader implications of what unfolded during those January days in London will take time to fully assess. If King Charles proceeds with defamation litigation against his own son and daughter-in-law, it will represent a turning point in royal history with no modern precedent. It would transform a family dispute conducted largely through media proxies into a formal legal confrontation with consequences that neither side can fully predict or control. It would force a court of law to adjudicate on questions of memory, intention, and truth that have thus far existed in the contested space between personal testimony and institutional denial. What is already clear, however, is that the Sussex strategy of leveraging royal identity while rejecting royal accountability has reached its limits. The palace has demonstrated a willingness to fight back through institutional channels rather than absorb further damage in silence. The British public, long divided in its sympathies between a couple who seemed genuinely wounded and an institution perceived as cold and unyielding, is increasingly focused on questions of responsibility and consequence. And at the center of it all, two brothers who once stood together at their mother's funeral now face each other across a legal and emotional chasm that grows wider with every passing week. The crown that Meghan claimed to be returning with intact is not made of gold or jewels. It is made of something far more fragile and far more powerful: legitimacy. And in January 2026, the question of who truly holds it became the most consequential question in British public life.